chat on law, and welcome to that. And we are very fortunate to have two accomplished center alums in the field. We have Emily Landherr, and she is a staff attorney at the Kentucky Supreme Court. And then we also have Brian Klosterboer, and he is a civil rights attorney for the ACLU of Texas. So they are both going to talk a little bit about their career path and how they got from center into the law and what they do, any general tips they might have about for aspiring lawyers. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So we drew straws, and Emily agreed to kick us off. And also thank you both for joining us. We very much appreciate your time.
Of course, I'm glad to be here and glad to share my experiences. I graduated from center in 2013. I was a psychology major, which might be a little unconventional for law school, but that was sort of one of my favorite aspects of law school, is that you really did get to meet people with all different types of backgrounds and trajectories on how they got there. I always was sort of interested in how the mind worked and thought, you know, maybe one day I might want to do some type of jury consulting. So that's sort of what led me to pick the psychology major. And I did do a government minor, so that way I could get some, you know, law related courses in as well. I sort of always knew I wanted to go to law school, so the path was pretty easy for me to decide. I did sort of hesitate there for a little bit. I think I didn't really settle on it until my sophomore year at center, but always was interested in just the vast amount of opportunities in the legal field. Lawyers can mean so many things and do so many things that are just so diverse. So that always really interested me. And then upon graduating from center, I went to U of L for law school. I did quite a few things while I was there. I was on the law review and did some legal clinics where we actually got the opportunity to practice as partially licensed attorneys under the supervision of fully licensed attorneys, which was a really great experience. So yeah, I had a lot of great opportunities at U of L. And once I graduated from U of L and passed the bar exam, I started working for the Jefferson County Master Commissioner's Office. So each county in Kentucky has a Master Commissioner, and what they primarily do is handle foreclosures. So they approve judgments when people, you know, default on mortgage payments and things, and ultimately are kind of responsible for helping getting houses taken away from people, which was kind of a more depressing line of work, to be quite candid about it. But I worked there for about a year and a half, and it was really nice because it was part-time at first. I decided to also take the Indiana bar. I'm in Louisville, so it's really close to Southern Indiana. And therefore, you know, I thought being licensed in Indiana as well might open up some more career opportunities for me. So they were really flexible, and it was interesting at first. I never really saw myself doing anything with property law. It was actually one of my least favorite classes in law school, but it was great experience. I learned a lot about just how the court system works where I'm at, and how people, you know, attorneys take things from the initial pleading stages all the way to getting judgments against various parties. So that was really interesting. And then I worked there for about a year and a half and started getting a little tired of the monotony of it. Most cases looked identical, so it just got a little boring for me over time. And out of the blue, received a message on LinkedIn of all platforms from a former law professor, and she asked if I would be interested in clerking for a judge. And that was really the only information she gave me. She told me it was local, so that was nice, knowing that if I wanted to pursue this opportunity, I'd be able to stay where I was currently living. And, you know, without really knowing much more, I took a chance and told her, sure, I'm interested. And come to find out, it was an opportunity to clerk for the Supreme Court of Kentucky. So once I got that job, I've been doing that since January of 2018. 2018. So coming up on 4 years now. And I work specifically for one of the 7 justices on the court, Justice Elizabeth Hughes. She's the Deputy Chief Justice, which basically just means if the Chief Justice can't act for some reason, maybe he has a conflict of interest or isn't available, then she'll kind of step in and take over that leadership role. But the Kentucky Supreme Court hears all types of cases. We have civil cases, so think like slip and falls at grocery stores or maybe car accidents. Those cases eventually can get appealed up to the Supreme Court. But most of what we see is criminal cases. If a criminal defendant is convicted and sentenced to life in prison for 20 years or more, so that includes life imprisonment or sentenced to death, they automatically can appeal to the Supreme Court. So it kind of skips the intermediary level of courts in Kentucky, which is the Court of Appeals, and comes right to the Kentucky Supreme Court. So a lot of what I do is research and writing. Each justice on the court, I would say, operates their office a little bit differently, but the justice I work for, I'm lucky enough that she gives us a lot of autonomy. There's one other clerk who works in the same position I do, and we work on our cases from start to finish. So when we're assigned our cases, parties submit what we call briefs, and that's just where they're basically laying out the facts, what happened in the court below. They're making their arguments. They cite to various statutes and case law. And that's kind of our starting point. So I'll read all of those and consider what they have to say. But it is very important for me to do my own research. And, at the end of the day, these are all attorneys, so they're very good at arguing and making you believe what they want you to believe. So I do have to kind of do my own work too. And I draft the opinion. So any type of case that I work on, I make the first draft, and I can consult with my boss if I have questions or maybe am confused. The bulk of what our ultimate decision is whether to uphold what a court below did or to reverse it and maybe send it back for a new trial or more fact finding or whatever it might be. So a lot of times I find myself wanting to consult with her because, if I think maybe a decision should be upheld, I want to make sure that she's on that same page with me before I take the time to write the opinion that way. So there is a lot of collaboration, and when you work for a judge of any kind, that judge is likely going to be very experienced in law. They've had careers oftentimes before they take the bench. So they're just invaluable sources of information and knowledge and experience. So I highly recommend clerking for a judge of any type when you're just starting out. I think it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet and see what you might be interested in. And that's really been the benefit for me. Coming out of law school, I really didn't know what kind of law I might want to practice or what type of career I'd want to have. So getting to clerk for a court where they hear so many types of cases has been really helpful for me to kind of help me figure out what my next step might be. But once we draft our opinions and get them finalized, 8 months out of the year, we all meet for what we call Court Week, and that's at Frankfurt in the Capitol. And the justices will submit their cases for the court's consideration. So it's a court of 7. They all have to vote on whether they agree with an opinion or maybe want to write a dissent and express their own thoughts on the case. But that is my most favorite part of the job, is getting to meet with all the justices from across the state and their staff and getting to, work together. Maybe one justice might have a concern about a decision that Justice Hughes is making, and I'm able to help collaborate with that office and explain what the trial court did or maybe what they didn't do. And I will say Kentucky is unique. I believe they're one of the 2 states in the country that allow their law clerks to be in the conference room with them when they're deliberating over cases. So another aspect of our court weeks is the court hears oral arguments. Sometimes they think that with particular issues or facts, it would be helpful to hear oral arguments from the parties to help maybe flesh out some of the issues that are involved. And once those arguments are over, I get to go into the conference room along with the other law clerks and just listen in and take notes. And with that comes a high degree of confidentiality. Oftentimes we know the decisions of cases months before the public knows, which is it's kind of scary. Sometimes I worry that I might slip up, but luckily I haven't had that issue. But getting to work for a state court too is just really impactful. You know, the Supreme Court is the court of last resort in Kentucky. It's the final interpreter of our state's laws. So, you know, even though it's Justice Hughes's work, ultimately, I feel like I get the ball rolling and start those opinions. So I get to play a small role in, the, you know, decisions that are ultimately going to impact everyone in the state. So it's been really, really rewarding work. She is retiring at the end of next year, so I'm already trying to think of what I might do next, and very sad about having to leave this position because it's been so wonderful and helped me learn more about the law than I ever could have imagined, and different types of law too. So I highly would recommend considering a clerkship of some sort. And moving on to maybe some pieces of advice I have for aspiring lawyers, I would say never be afraid to ask for help or clarification, whether that's, you know, just in an internship or maybe from one of your peers, because I guarantee you most people would appreciate you seeking that clarification or maybe asking those questions rather than just assuming something or jumping right into it if you're confused, because ultimately, you know, as lawyers, regardless of what type of law you do, or if you're actually in practice, we have people's interests at stake. Sometimes even their lives are in our hands. So it's very important to have a good grip on what you're doing. And the other thing someone told me before I started law school was to find your people. And that means different things to me. So not only is it important to have a good support system when you're in law school, whether that's your family or your friends, maybe a spouse or significant other, you're really going to need those people to help support you and get you through, because law school is challenging, and you're going to need people on the outside world to kind of keep you sane and keep you grounded. So I think that's very important, especially networking with your peers and kind of getting a group within law school too, because they're the ones that are right by your side, kind of going through these struggles with you. And it can just be really helpful to know that you're not alone. And then the other piece of advice is to get real world experience wherever and whenever you can, because one thing that really surprised me on exiting law school was that the actual practice of law is very, very different than my law school experience was. In law school, they teach you all about the law, what it is and what it says, but they don't really teach you how to practice it or how to do it. And so there's different ways you can get experience, whether that's just a summer internship. I started in college one summer working at the front desk of a law firm and taking mail around to people and taking pleadings to the courthouse. And I had no idea what I was doing, but at least I was in that environment and could overhear conversations and see what these licensed attorneys were doing day in and day out. So that was really helpful from the start. You know, it's not anything fancy, but at least you're in that environment and gaining that experience. And I know there's lots of internships while you're in law school, even if they're unpaid, which I know no one wants to work for free, but at the same time, you are gaining that experience, that knowledge that otherwise you wouldn't have. And I do know lots of law schools like U of L had clinic opportunities. So like I mentioned earlier, you get a limited practice license and do work under licensed attorneys. When I was in school, I worked for a domestic violence clinic and actually represented victims of domestic violence to help them get protective orders against the person that was abusing them in some way, which just to kind of be thrust into the courtroom was a scary thing. But at the end of that experience, I learned so much, and it just had the practice. You know, it's kind of like just a trial run for you, because you know the attorney next to you is going to step in if you mess something up or anything like that. So, and I would say even if you're not necessarily interested in something, try it, because you really don't know until you get that hands-on experience. When I was in law school, I said I was going to do medical malpractice defense. That was my thing. And here I am doing nothing of the sort. And actually, I know I don't want to practice that kind of law just because I had these ideas about it in my head. But upon seeing how it actually works and how it's actually practiced, I realized that wasn't for me. So definitely get as much experience as you can.
Thank you, Emily.
Hey everyone, my name is Brian Klosterboer, and it's good to be with you all. I really loved my time at Center, and so I miss Kentucky and wish I could be there in person right now, but I'm calling you from Houston, Texas, where I currently work for the ACLU of Texas as a staff attorney. When I was at Center, I was a history major and also international studies minor, and I was fortunate to be able to study abroad in both Shanghai, and I went to Cameroon with Professor Hartman. So I was really passionate about like areas of the world that I knew very little about. And that kind of led me to care more and more about human rights law. I think I was never, even when I was in college, I never knew for sure that I wanted to go to law school, but it was always like one of the options. I also was thinking about maybe going into journalism. I was like part of the Cento, or thinking about maybe doing academia and something like African history or African politics. And then I ended up doing a research fellowship. I got a Fulbright to go to Uganda and spend a year there after I graduated from Center, which was a really life-changing experience. And I feel really fortunate to have done that. I know, especially now with the pandemic still happening, it's been incredibly difficult to travel, and even things like Peace Corps and Fulbright were completely shut down for almost 2 years. So I hope that those of you who want those opportunities are able to get them soon, because it really helped me, I think, just having a much broader perspective on the world, which is something that Center like provides in such a valuable way. So I did apply to law school, and I ended up going to Harvard in Boston, and I had really high expectations, for going to Harvard, and thought, because of the name and the prestige, but I actually found that the academic environment was fairly underwhelming compared to Center in particular. There's a big difference between a lot of my professors in law school were very famous. A lot of them published many books and were constantly writing editorials for major newspapers. But there's a big gap between being famous and publishing and like actually teaching or facilitating classroom discussion. And like you can just tell that Center is like so focused on the actual like personalized education and having a really enriching classroom environment. So I found law school to be much less enjoyable. But I think Center prepares you well for it. The main things, the bulk of your work is going to be reading and writing, and creating, identifying arguments and making arguments. And I think many of the classes I took in college prepared me really well for that, particularly like philosophy courses or English courses also were really helpful for both of those things. And like Emily, I spent a lot of time in law school working with legal clinics. Particularly since I was passionate about international human rights. I spent 2 years in the International Human Rights Legal Clinic, where I was able to work on human rights cases, including several briefs that went up to the US Supreme Court. I also did a couple direct service kind of organizations and a few internships to get the hands-on experience. I was able to keep going back to Uganda during law school and keep doing human rights work. I also interned for a civil rights, human rights law firm in DC and really enjoyed that experience as well. And then when I graduated law school, I was applying to a bunch of different jobs, but particularly judicial clerkships. So like Emily, I worked for a judge, and that's what brought me to Houston. I moved to Houston, I guess in 2016, and worked for a federal trial court judge. And I had some family in Austin, and I had grown up kind of in Austin, Texas. So I had some Texas connection, but was new to Houston, did not really have very high expectations for Houston, sort of the opposite of law school. But it was the inverse in that even like law school was sort of a disappointment compared to where I put my expectations. And then Houston was the opposite. I had very low expectations, but ended up really loving it here. I love the judge I worked for. Clerking was a really great experience. So I echo that. It helps you get exposed to just so many different areas of law and things that are going on. And then I also had a 2-year clerkship. Many of the clerkships are only 1 year, just like a lot of fellowships for post-law graduates are 1 year. I think it's difficult in a 1-year position because you're kind of already applying for the next job before you really start what you're doing. But the benefit of like a 2-year position was that I could actually start, kind of get settled, make some connections in Houston, and realize that there's a lot of need for civil rights, human rights work here. So even though I had originally really been most interested in international human rights work, the fall of 2016 was when the presidential election happened, and it became apparent there was a lot of civil rights work to be done here in the US, and particularly in Texas. There was like a big shortage of civil rights attorneys and people working in these areas. So I had no connections to the ACLU of Texas, but I sent a cold email to one of the attorneys who I had read about and kind of seen some of the lawsuits that she had worked on, and there were some overlapping interest areas. And I just asked to set up like a phone call with her and chatted. And then I sent in my resume and application materials. And I ended up applying for fellowships. And I think the fellowship process, so similar, there's the post-college fellowships, like I did the Fulbright. And that's like a whole process of applying for those kind of things. And then post-law school, there's also a fellowship process, which is similar in that you basically get funding to do something you're passionate about, which is exciting. The process itself is a little like time intensive and arduous and not very straightforward, but I think is worth trying to navigate, particularly if you want to go into like public interest law. The salaries tend to not be very high, and it's really important to kind of get that your first job or two and kind of get your foot in the door. And it's a helpful process. And then a lot of law schools have either loan repayment programs, or there's the federal government has a public service kind of loan forgiveness program. And so opportunities like that allow, because law school is very expensive. I think if there's one thing I would maybe go back and do differently, I would take even more time potentially between college and law school. Because I think once you go to law school, you start accruing debt for like 99% of people. And also you're kind of, once you're in law school, you're on that professional track. It's harder to like take time off to like go to Africa or China or like go do something, completely different. Where like once you're on that track, there's this kind of like this pressure of like having to do the professional opportunity, like practicing law, like taking the bar exam, and then you have the loans to pay for it. It gets much harder to like travel or do other things. Whereas before, maybe post-college, you might have a chance to do things like that potentially. So that's kind of where I am now. The ACLU, we are every state actually is technically a separate nonprofit. So there's the ACLU national office, and then also like the ACLU of Kentucky, which I follow on social media, is like a different nonprofit from the ACLU of Texas. But we all tend to have very similar goals. We work on different issue areas, including voting rights, criminal justice reform, immigrants' rights, abortion rights, and LGBT rights, amongst other issues too. So I personally work a lot on LGBT rights and also criminal justice reform. I did a 2-year fellowship here, which is kind of how I got my foot in the door. And then now I am a full-time staff attorney working on various cases. We sometimes take civil rights cases to court. We also do a lot of legislative advocacy and pushing for policy change. I do a lot of school-based work. So I tend to go to different school districts across the state and try to help educate the educators on how students should be treated. And we're trying to reduce like race discrimination. Also, I represent a lot of LGBT students, including who are transgender and non-binary. And so it's been a mix of work. We also do a lot of communications and kind of public facing work. So we work with the media, and we do different like blogs and things like that to try to let people know about civil rights and kind of push the ball forward on various issue areas. So every day has really been different, which I appreciate. We work on a lot of different issues that come up. And I think the skills you gain at Center are really helpful in just being exposed to kind of a critical way of thinking about things. Lots of research, lots of reading, and lots of writing are all really important skills for being a lawyer.
All right, thank you, Brian. That's great information from both our participants. You guys can open it up. I'm going to open it up now for questions. Be sure to unmute yourself, and don't be shy. This is a great resource. We have two very knowledgeable people from the field of career, or for the field of law, to help you with your career questions. So, any questions? Come on, somebody's got to have a question.
What was like the best way that you were able to improve your like reading and writing skills? Was it more developed like in undergrad, like at center or at law school, or like what resources did you use to further like your writing and reading skills?
I would say center obviously did a lot of writing there, and it was, kind of good enough to get by. But I would say what helped me most was in the first year of law school, I figure that most law schools are like this, but we took it was called basic legal skills. And what that truly focused on was writing, because, you think of lawyers being these oral advocates who have to be great presenters and be able to talk in front of a judge or other people, but really so much of the practice of law today is writing. So in that class, I thought I was a great writer all my life. I've thought I was a great writer. And then that class really knocked me back and said, wait a minute, maybe I've been doing this wrong. So that class really helped me learn how to write more concisely and to just be direct in what I was saying rather than using like a passive voice. And I think also reading Supreme Court opinions or documents that come from judges and things can really help you understand and get great examples of what good writing looks like. But certainly I think my writing skills were most not perfected, but I learned the most in that first year of law school.
Yeah, and I think I agree. And I also, when I came to center, I think I too thought I was like a good reader and writer. And there were some classes I took that were particularly difficult at center that were really helpful, like even with Professor Emmett. And then also I found that the classes I took in different areas that I was not majoring in were really helpful. Like I took like 1 or 2 philosophy classes, 1 or 2 religion classes. And I found reading like really dense material is really helpful in college, because I don't know if any of you have started studying for the LSAT, but I found the hardest section of the LSAT for me was actually the reading comprehension section, because it just requires you to be like very kind of detail oriented, but also read like dense things very quickly, which was good if you were assigned a lot of reading in some courses from certain professors. So those are other things to do. And yeah, I echo that. I also use the writing center at center sometimes as well. And I found that the professors I remember the most are the ones who were like the harshest graders. I think at the time it was annoying to take their classes, but those are honestly the classes that like prepare me the best.
Next question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Ellie, you can go first.
Okay. So I'm a sophomore, so I'm just wondering like what I can be doing right now, like in my undergrad years to stand out to potential law schools, internships, fellowship opportunities, just any ideas that you have to make like an application for any of those things stand out.
I would definitely say being involved in different organizations was helpful for me. I, to be quite candid, was not like an A student at center, like honestly struggled a little bit, did not have the best GPA. My LSAT score was probably below average, to be honest. But I think being involved in, I did a lot of volunteering while I was at center through my sorority and just on my own. And I played softball too, so that limited a little bit of my spare time. But I think all the experiences you can get in maybe leadership roles or through, serving through various organizations can be really helpful, because what I learned in applying to law school is that while grades are important, obviously they're going to look at the numbers, the LSAT scores, et cetera, but really it's your resume as a whole that I think can get you in the door. I applied to U of L and was actually waitlisted at first. I was getting ready to move to South Carolina for law school and got a call that I'd been accepted off of the wait list. And coming from center and just being like a super academic, and I always loved school, did well in school, did decent at center, but that was just really hard for me to realize, wait a minute, even though I'm good, there's people out there that are better than me. So that was a really humbling experience. But I do know, I'm proof that they look at more than just the numbers. So I think your involvement will definitely help you stand out.
Yeah, and I think it's good to try to find things you're passionate about and interested in, and also trying out different things is helpful for you. ultimately, whenever you're applying for fellowships and even somewhat law school, it's helpful to like build a narrative for why you want to go do this thing and why you're like the perfect person for them to pick for this thing. And so there is kind of a way, usually you typically like reprioritize kind of your resume and talk about in your cover letter, your story of why this is so important to you. But I think it's also, it's a tough balance because at the same time, especially a place like Center, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to do many different things that aren't necessarily related. And sometimes as you're applying a couple years from now, you'll then be like weaving together the story of how everything kind of fits. But I think as long as you pursue things you're interested in and passionate about, it'll be beneficial for you. And then you can also kind of build that into a cohesive narrative of why whatever you decide to do is like the thing in that moment.
Avery, did you have a question?
Yeah. So in terms, I wanted to go back to reading comprehension, and the LSATs, like LSAT studying in general. So I'm a politics major and English minor. And so in terms of like effectively reading things at a certain pace, because all 4 of my classes are assigning dense readings because of religion and English in general and like political analysis, how, in terms of like reading comprehension, how can you get the best information possible in a very short amount of time while being involved in all of these things? Like, what were some methods that you guys used?
Yeah, that is really tough because like you said, you need to be able to read a lot in a little bit of time, but at the same time, you have to be able to understand and retain some of what you just read. So while reading quickly is great, if you don't retain any of it, it's not going to help you out. I think one thing I kind of tried to do, and I don't know that this would work for everyone, but in reading something, even if it was just a paragraph or something, I would read it as quickly as I could, but then kind of, close the page and say, okay, what did I just read, and try to summarize it for myself. And if I couldn't really tell myself what I had just read, then that was kind of a sign to me, okay, maybe I read that too quickly and kind of sacrifice some of the comprehension element. But I think trying to kind of like test yourself like that can be helpful to make sure you're actually retaining the information that you read.
I think I spent a lot of time early in life trying to learn how to speed read, but I eventually gave up because I wasn't good at it. And then, yeah, I think it's more important. I just read things at the pace I read them at, but I try to just really understand what I'm reading. And I remember that was the toughest section for me on the LSAT. I think for LSAT prep generally, I took like a ton of practice exams. You can get every former exam. They come in like books that are like $20. I actually didn't take a course or do anything other than I just got like dozens of these old exams, and I would do basically a full exam every week. And then almost every weeknight, even during my senior year, I would like do at least the 30-minute section. And the timing of it, I think, is one of the toughest parts. So I would time myself very strictly and like even like shave off like 5 minutes, like make myself do it in even less time. I guess I don't know if LSAT's changed at all. I guess it's like 10 years ago now. But I remember if they still have the logic game section, I found that I got to the point where it was almost fun to do. And I think when it became fun, that's when I was like, oh, I think I'm ready to take the test. Like it's now like weirdly enjoyable. But yeah, the reading never became enjoyable, and it was always so crunched for time. But I would try to read it and just understand it and then answer the questions as quickly as possible. So I wouldn't have to go back. I didn't have to go back to the text and look at it again because I had kind of read it like thoroughly enough to understand it. And that's what I tried to do in law school too. You read a lot of really old Supreme Court cases that are really hard to understand and read, and it's not that enjoyable, but it is good to try to comprehend as much as possible because it's helpful.
Thank you.
I was going to add real quickly too, the Learning Commons, if you talk to Brian Casada, they have some resources on improving reading comprehension. I think they even have a workshop or program. But I've had several students talk about that being helpful who felt like they were really kind of struggling with that. So that might be another resource on campus. Other questions for our attorneys, lawyers? Last chance. Oh, Renee, yeah.
Okay, I have another question. So I plan to major in chemistry, which is sort of unconventional for law school. A lot of people are like government or like history minded people, and I'm not. Do you have any advice for like how to manage going to law school as like a non-conventional major, or like how that affected you, and like if it was a good experience or like you wish you had done something different? I plan to do something related to patent law, but just wanted like a point of view of like somebody who wasn't like a conventional major, I guess.
Yeah, I actually had a good friend in law school who was a non-traditional student, in the sense that she took quite a few years between college before coming to law school, but that's because she was obtaining her PhD in, I think, like molecular biology or something that you just really would never guess from a law school student. And she was, to this day, is one of the smartest people I know. And I just think it's important to maybe try to find someone else when you're in law school that maybe is also from a science background, because I guarantee you there will be someone. And she's actually a patent lawyer now here in Louisville. But I think that coming from a different background, I know psychology is a very soft science, but just kind of having that different experience, I think actually helped me, because, you know, you learn so much about reading and writing in law school, and you get that, you know, those traditional subjects that you need to succeed in the law profession, but having a different background, I feel, just generally kind of gave me a different perspective on things sometimes. And it just enhanced the law school experience that much more. But I definitely think trying to find peers that maybe come from a similar background could be really helpful. But I wouldn't worry too much about having that different background, because honestly, I think it'll help you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could be very helpful, especially if you end up going into patent law, but even other, like the current legal director of the ACLU of Texas was a biochemistry major, and he was planning on going into patent law, but then he actually didn't like patent law, and now he's a civil rights lawyer and my boss. So I know plenty of people who did things like very different before going to law school, and even having, some people have like entire careers and then decide to go to law school and change things up. So I think whatever path you take, things will work out.
Thank you.
More questions? Anybody else have a question? Okay. Well, how about closing thoughts? If nobody has a question, I would like to give both Emily and Brian a chance to say any final thoughts.
I guess one thing I was thinking about that I wanted to mention earlier is that I think creating relationships with your professors is very important. I think it's important that you feel comfortable to go talk to them or seek their help or guidance, not only at center, but in your law school careers as well, because that's actually how I got a handful of my jobs. I did an internship in Washington, D.C. solely because a professor helped me, you know, find the opportunity and recommended me and things like that. So I think making those connections is really helpful, not only to help you exceed while you're in law school or at center, but it's going to help you even beyond that. I can't stress networking enough, meeting people and putting yourself out there, which has always been difficult for me because I am a more shy person. But if you're able to do that, just get your foot in the door places, it can really surprise you later on in how beneficial that can be. And I think Brian said something that really just resonated with me. You have to find something that you're passionate about, something that's going to drive you, whether it's a particular area of the law or a certain subject matter. You kind of have to know your why when you're doing law school. My sister just graduated from the University of Alabama and has kind of said in the past year or so that she wanted to go on the law track. And one thing that I really stressed to her was, please be sure, because not only is it a time commitment, you're in law school for 3 years, and then you have the period after where you're rigorously studying for the bar, but it's a huge financial commitment too. Lots of people like myself leave law school a little bit in debt, which is hard to, you know, I don't know. It's difficult. So just be sure and try to get as much hands-on experience as you can to really kind of, you know, try to know, okay, this is truly something I want to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's why, like, if you're able to and have an interest in doing other things before law school, I would even recommend that, because, like, yeah, once you get on the track, it's harder. You have the financial constraints and then also kind of the professional constraints around your time and what's expected of you. But I also, yeah, echo what Emily said too about, like working, like having fun and meeting people. Like, I think I spent a lot of time, both in college and law school, studying. I mean, you're spending an immense amount of time on academics, but the people it's also really important to have those relationships, both with professors and also your friends and colleagues. So many center alumni actually end up becoming attorneys, and it can be incredibly useful if you're, especially, I work at a nonprofit, so we don't really focus on this, but if you're in private practice, a lot of your business will depend on referrals and people knowing who you are. And so it's incredibly helpful to have those friendships. And I kind of wish in law school too, like, I think one of the benefits of going to law school is having that network of incredible people. But it is, like, it's difficult to balance with the commitment of having to spend so many hours reading every night. But yeah, I wish I keep in touch with some people, and it's also been hard in the pandemic, of course. So I'm hopeful as things, hopefully keep reopening, to be able to kind of rekindle some of those relationships and be more social with people and stay more in closer touch with people in the future, because it's definitely helpful on many levels.
Okay, lots of great information. And once again, thank you so much. We appreciate the time. So thank you, Brian and Emily. We feel fortunate to have alums that can offer such good advice.
You're welcome. I was very happy to share my experience, and hopefully it was helpful to some extent.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, good luck, everyone. Good being with you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.